Right. Hey, everyone. My name is Sandeep Kella. I am a alum of the University of Michigan, and I spoke at the university a couple months back and just about my experiences, my entrepreneurial journey. And one of the things we talked about was sharing more stories of alums, making it as relatable as possible, so that the students could learn from this experience. And so when I was thinking about this and who to talk to, actually a couple weeks ago, I bumped into my friend Dave Alpern at an event, and he's a U of M grad, and we were just talking about his journey, and I thought it was hyper relevant and relatable to so many students. So really excited to have Dave here. Just so you guys know a little bit of background on Dave. Dave is the founder and managing partner of a private equity firm called Varsity Healthcare Partners, extremely successful private equity firm here in Los Angeles. Uh, but he didn't always start that way, right? He came from a very different background, which I'll talk about, which led to a long and successful career in finance before he took the jump into starting his own firm. So, Dave, thank you for being here. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So I think, I kind of thought about the flow of this conversation, and let's just start out with, when you were a student here, you came from the Youngstown, Ohio area, landed at Michigan. Like, what was your college experience like? What kind of student
Yeah.
here?
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me. I've got a really, obviously a really strong affinity for the University of Michigan. Um, so to answer that question, here's how I would describe my college experience. I mean, one is I came from a school of 300 people. My graduating class was 90. I was constantly overstimulated, and trying to figure out, and I was one of these guys that had a lot of different groups of friends, not one core group. So I was sort of I stretched myself thin a bit, certainly not intentionally. It was just painting a picture of somebody who was a little bit uncertain about themselves. I was in LS&A. Candidly, I come from a town where the most successful people are doctors or lawyers, and you're not really aware of any other career track. So I didn't go to the business school. I candidly scratched my head a bit as to what those people were doing. I studied in that library. I was pretty hard at it as a student. So I was super, really on top of it. I was a history major. So you'd see me in the library every night. I was also working part-time. I'm proud to say I was the first employee of the New York Pizza Depot. So I would actually deliver pizza, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, some combination of 3 days a week, which would pay for basically beer money and working capital for me. I mean that was my college career. I was working a lot in the library. I was delivering pizza. I was a bit uncertain about what's going to happen to me after college, other than I started preparing and taking the LSAT. But beyond that, like really, really sort of unsure of myself, but enjoying my time at the University of Michigan, almost assuredly.
So you didn't come to the university with this grand plan of, you study this, get into finance, go into private equity. You kind of started with,
No,
was
I'll tell.
history something you were just interested in and you wanted to explore? Or
So I came from, the answer is yes. Like I thought history, which was sort of pitched as the study of human beings making sense of their own lives, that made a ton of sense to me. The professors in that department were excellent. I just happened to stumble upon a couple of them my freshman year. And I'm certainly interested in US history, but it was also more about analytical reading and writing. That's what I gravitated towards. I never took a business class. I just didn't really know what utility there would be. I knew I wasn't going to be pre-med, and my soft plan was, hey, I'm just going to say this out loud. I was a waitlist student to get in the University of Michigan. This was the best school I applied to. So I got into my reach school and planned on one day going to law school. My father was a small town attorney. Um, that was what I knew. That was sort of my soft plan.
yeah. And so, it makes sense. I think a lot of people go into college. If I ask my youngest, kid, she's 8 years old, she wants to be a dentist because that's what her mom does. That's what she knows. And it
Yeah.
sounds like it's similar to you in that. What changed? Like, when did you
Yeah.
decide? What
And
clicked for you that said, "Hey, I don't want to go into law. I want to pursue something else"?
this is where it's going to get a little bit philosophic, because I do think there's some good learnings to pull out here. Although I was kind of, you know, none of this was intentional. But here's what happened. I graduated in 1998. Think about what's happening in the economy. That is the roaring time in the technology market, which meant Wall Street, who was financing all those equity offerings for early stage companies. That is like right bullseye in the middle of the dot-com era. Wall Street is roaring. The equity market is roaring, which means recruiting is roaring.
Yeah.
As I took the LSAT, I'm going into my senior year, and candidly, man, I'm watching all these people that I'm like, I'm smarter than those guys. I'm more motivated than those people. Get these fancy jobs in something called investment banking, which I had no understanding of what it was. And I quickly did some research and realized it had to do with mergers and acquisitions, or at least that was my very shallow understanding of what banking was. Seemed interesting to me. And I sort of said to myself, I could go apply. Part of it was just out of being competitive with those other people. Why are they getting jobs and not me? And I said, hey, if I could land one of those jobs, um, I can always go back to law school. Law school's not going anywhere. And hey, maybe I hate it, but I spend 2 years learning financial, analytical, and accounting skills, and maybe learn a little bit about the U.S. capital markets, which is in those days, like my dumb kind of reasoning was, wow, I keep reading about all these cool acquisitions in the paper. I would get to work on those. And I started interviewing, and lo and behold, again, because of how furiously Wall Street was looking for people who were motivated and with a good record of GPA, and in my case, I was willing to work really hard. I landed a job at a place called Credit Suisse First Boston, in a generalist program. So there was 6 weeks of training in New York on accounting and financial modeling and financial analytics. And I was like, wow, I'm going to go
You,
do
ca-
this for 2 years.
you came in with probably zero understanding of
Zero.
how spreadsheet worked and
No accounting background. I literally am the only person during analyst training in New York who is not going out partying, because I'm like, I got to learn this shit. And by the way, accounting's a new language. I got to learn this in like 6 weeks.
it's a very similar experience. I came from engineering, didn't know a thing about accounting and was thrown into the deep end. So that makes sense. So you made this switch, kind of preserved the option to go back into law school. And so now you're working at Credit Suisse. When did you realize, like, hey, law school is no longer in the cards for me? Like what changed?
Yeah. So this is where, along the way, what one of my mentors in that office, a very senior managing director who just recently retired, took me aside and said, you're probably looking at my life, because he was working really, he'd be there around the clock with me, and he was probably in his 40s, and saying to me, um, but Alpern, you really seem to love this stuff. And by the way, I mean, I was like regularly coming home at 6 in the morning, and you work incredibly inefficiently. Like during the day, you're sort of half awake, and then your MD comes to you at 5 o'clock and gives you a bunch of work that you got to stay up all night processing. But he said to me, don't worry about making a career choice about banking right now. These years are all about skill acquisition.
Yeah.
Just acquire as many skills and relationships as you can during these years, and pay attention for something that you have enthusiasm for. You'll know it. And he said to me, I feel like you have enthusiasm for this work. And no one had ever really put it to me that way. And what I realized was I actually did really like the work. Like I'm a curious person. When I see a coffee cup, I sort of say to myself, certainly in those years, wow, I wonder who made that coffee cup and what supply chain is required to produce this ceramic, coating for it. And by the way, what regulations govern what size? And I can, in my mind, I was one of these people. What I figured out was, when I see a product or hear about a business, my like skill that I didn't know I had was I could reimagine that business in the context of the financial statements. Like it
Got
was
it.
just easy. Somebody said I'm a distribution business. I'd say, okay, low margin, sort of high working capital, probably low differentiation because it's low margin. Is there any value add? Like for some reason, my mind worked that way. The only other thing, and the other thing about it was, uh, banking and analytical work requires you to speak the language of financial statements, which means you have to understand GAAP-based financials. Sandeep, oddly, there are two things in my life that came really easy to me. One of them was accounting. I just like oddly debits and credits that was just really logical. My brain processed it really fast. The other one was Latin. And I'm proud to say in 1994, I was one of the winners of the National Latin Exam gold medal, which I never got to utilize. But it was just something I realized, wow, I'm good at this and I have
Wow.
enthusiasm for this. And that's something that you have to pay a lot of attention to at that age and realize you get sparked. And fast forward, you'll see I realize I'm getting sparked again as I pursue this career.
Yeah, I mean, I think if in some ways your ability to learn a language like Latin translates into accounting, right? It is its own,
Totally,
right?
totally.
It's interesting what you said, Dave, about skill development. So, when I spoke at the university a couple months ago, a lot of students came up to me afterwards, and they're everyone's sort of consumed with like, what's the right industry for me to get into at this stage? And when you were graduating, it was the dot-com era. For me, I saw that as well. I'm about 4 years after you, but I actually remember vividly that Good Time Charlie's was giving you a free beer every time you brought in an offer letter. And this shows you how good the market was. People were coming in with like 20, 30 offer letters from companies. So
Wow.
timing of the market matters. But anyway, this idea of like it's impossible to predict, or it's very difficult to predict what industry is going to last for the next 20, 30 years. So this idea of skill development and just acquire as many skills and then hope you kind of it all comes together into something that you really enjoy. Like
Right.
what's some practical advice you would give
Yeah.
students around how to acquire these skills?
So, I'm gonna my advice. This is my advice, and it is my experience, and only mine. And I'm not here to say that I'm the world's most successful entrepreneur, but this really did make a difference in my life. And my entrepreneurial journey, was transformational in my life. Um, I am really negative on someone telling me at an undergraduate stage, even a couple years post undergraduate, that they know definitively what they want to do. I'm going to use a really easy example because I'm in healthcare. Um, you want to be a doctor, you have to commit yourself to that really early on a conventional path, which means you have to take biology and chemistry and all those pre-med prerequisites, which definitionally is a very big investment, is going to dictate a very different experience for you undergrad. And you're doing that having never practiced medicine. How do you know that this is what you love enough that you're going to call the ball on your career that early? Moreover, how do you know you're good at it? And so this is the key for me. If I look back and now prescriptively, when I coach people early in their career, what I found was the early innings of a career really, in my opinion, should be a little bit skill acquisition should be the emphasis. So go into things where if I hate this, in 2 to 3 years, I will have acquired some hard skills. For me, it was the ability to understand and take apart a business and a market, to actually recreate that business in an Excel model, which means through the language of GAAP-based financial statements, I got to understand how capital gets raised, debt and equity, really interesting.
Mhm.
Learn a little bit about legal documentation around raising of debt and credit. Um, and then when I was done, what I realized was I actually have a very high degree of enthusiasm for that. I love unpacking businesses. I love the velocity and strategy of the deal business, because there's a definitive end and a winner and a loser. And along the way, you sort of exercise your athletic muscle a bit in that you are competing on a team to win a deal. I always found that really thrilling. But what was so skill acquisition, looking for and being really, really honest and sincere, but also relentless about noticing enthusiasm in yourself.
Yeah.
And then make sure that it overlaps with something you're good at. And this is my problem with people who come in. A lot of people want to get into private equity investing today. And I say to them, like, the most important thing for you is to find the industry that you really have a high degree of enthusiasm for and make sure it's one you're good at.
Yep.
So there's my kind of being prescriptive about, I don't believe you know, or that you're a fully formed person to know, make those decisions during your undergraduate. I'm not sure you're capable of doing it 2 to 3 years out.
Sure. Yeah, couldn't agree more. One of the things I would add on to that is just the thing you may know about yourself is, are you a linear type person, or are you okay with sort of this abstract, unknown quality of just aggregating a bunch of skills and then having sort of faith that it's going to coalesce into something meaningful? Um, did you ever have doubts around that? Like when you were going through and you're acquiring all these skills, but you don't know if it's going to translate into a stable career or successful career, if it's going to translate financially.
Here's the thing, like those positions were really well compensated, still are, but in those days, surplus income and investment, I think I don't remember what it was, but it was it sounded like a crap load of money to me. I think my starting salary was like $50,000. And I remember my dad saying, you got to get a financial advisor. I mean, that's
Yeah.
so I wasn't worried about compensation. I was always like, sort of felt like I was playing with borrowed time, Sandeep, because I could go back to law school, and now I'm more interesting. Presumably, could be more relevant attorney if I decided to go into corporate law. But I also knew. Just the notion of, again, someone like, if I'm doing something I'm good at, if I'm doing something that I have high enthusiasm for, and to your point, like, is it a good business?
Yeah.
So there were very large payoffs for the people running investment banks and private equity firms, similar work. One's an agent, one's a principal, but all around deal work and raising of money and acquiring of business and selling of businesses. Um, that was clear to me if I wanted a career. And that's an extra layer here, which you're bringing up, which is, make sure is there a career track, and if there is, make sure that payoff is there relative to your own expectations.
Right. Right. It's like the intersection of figuring out the intersection of like what you're good at, what you really are passionate about, what is actually needed in the world, and then what's going to actually pay you, right?
Yes.
If
Yes.
you can combine those four things, then you've got something. So okay, so going back to your career now, so you're going down the finance track, and you leave banking to go into private equity. Everyone's got this notion of what private equity is, right? You think about the guys in the suits doing deals, hack
Yeah.
costs. Like what's something that you
Yeah.
realize people misunderstood about private equity?
So I was told, like, I actually didn't totally understand what it was. It was in the really early innings of the before private equity as an asset class boomed the way it did. This is really early innings. Um, Late 90s. I would say private equity probably began in the late 80s. Um, I had this vision that I'm going to go, be a client of an investment bank, and my feet are going to be up, and we're going to go talk to entrepreneurs. What happened was actually my professional life got even more rigorous, and even more like the demands on the analytical and detailed demands were magnified. And this was supposed to be the promised land that you go away from private equity. You're now a client. You're no longer an investment bank serving a client. You're the buyer of the business. The investment bank is milling. It turns out it was an actually horrendous lifestyle. We were immensely busy. I was traveling all the time. My bosses were even more relentless. Maybe our days were organized more productively, so we would be more productive during daylight hours. But the amount of work required, the detail orientation of that work, and I'm going to give you one big difference, Sandeep. Whereas before, I was sort of putting numbers in a model, presenting that model to my managing director on the investment banking side, and kind of solving for an answer. And all I really knew, the geography, I knew where numbers went in that spreadsheet. The answer was whatever it is that we were trying to justify as a value for our client to pay for a given target. Um, Now on the other side, instead of just putting numbers in the accounts receivable part of the balance sheet that makes the discounted cash flow model work when I was a banker, now it's actually like, what are our invoices and what are
Mhm.
terms? for the company that we're buying. Like you come down far, far lower altitude, and
Yeah.
those inputs and the amount of work that goes into the inputs is far more deep and thoughtful. But I loved it because it just took advantage of everything that I, again, thought I was good at, had enthusiasm for. Remember, was pulling apart businesses and recreating them in the context of their financial statements. Now I'm just doing it with a lot more depth, a lot more
Mhm.
access. Instead of pulling SEC filings, I have the entire controller, CFO, and I can literally say, "Hey, show me your invoices to your customers," and I'll use that to drive my DSO assumption in my receivable model that's driving my working capital investment. I mean, that's my most simplistic way to tell you how different that work was. But it was
Yeah.
not the good life. It was candidly, it was like it was like dialing things up even more in terms of anxiety and velocity and hours.
And this is you're in your mid-20s at this point, or late 20s?
Yeah, mid late 20s.
And so
So
you
I go ahead.
presumably you've got a lot of friends who are outside of finance and they're enjoying life a bit more. They're hanging out socially. Did you ever question this career path and feel like, hey man, I'm missing out on this
Yeah.
period of my life?
So here's where I'm gonna get a little philosophical. I never did. I was always my wife, then girlfriend, and then fiance, was out every night with her friends, dinners, movies, baseball games. There wasn't once that I didn't question why I was doing what I was doing. This
Mm.
is a really important point. There's an element of work-life balance is really important, but I don't actually think it's possible if you're a success-oriented person earlier in your career. The analogy I hear, there's a military guy, DJ Shipley, who's a pretty famous Navy SEAL, who talks about dials and switches. Um, switches is sort of what you have at your disposal earlier in your career if you want to be the best at what you do, which means you switch on and you give all your enthusiasm, all your hours, all your emotion, all your anxiety to that thing that you want to be good at, and approach your career that way. And it's only later when you can introduce dials. So
Yeah.
I can dial down that guy, come into my house, be a father for a few hours, change those dials. Like I hate to say, that wasn't an option, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't have availed myself of that option, because that's what I think is required for success-oriented people early in their careers.
And where do you think that came from? Because that's pretty rare, right? I think most of us question things and
Yeah,
don't have that relentless focus. But is
I,
that
I
is that from your
I generally
parents? Is that
find, yeah, like I'll answer it for me, but I have seen this in other people that express that same sort of one-dimensional, success at I want to develop myself and get where I'm going at, damn the torpedoes. Uh, I I feel so like I came from a home of a single parent. My mother died when I was very young, so I have this notion of being in a hurry constantly. Like I watched, one of the most important people in my life kind of disappear, and said to myself, "Shit, I only have a certain number of years. I better make the most of those years." And this wasn't something that I sort of backfilled for. Like I felt it absolutely when I was 7 years old. My father is also has a really strong work ethic. So he just retired. I think he's 75. And so it was those two things, but mostly fear, fear that like I wanted more stability in my life, having been destabilized early,
yeah.
and in a hurry to make use of time because time is fleeting.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. And for I think a lot of us have fear, right? When I was a student,
Totally.
I struggled with that all the time. Of like, what's this all going to look like? Am I going to be something? What would you what would you tell, the students who are part of this around like how to conquer fear? Or maybe not even conquer it. That's probably the wrong word because I don't think you ever fully conquer it. But how do you harness it in a productive way like you did?
Yeah. So like I'm saying this now, but I wouldn't have known it then, which is why you're asking me. But I have fear now. Look, I have a enormous amount of my net worth on the table in the business that I co-founded. I mean, I'm staring in the face every day. We own 14 companies today. They're small and dynamic. They're not kind of all 100% recurring revenue contractually and just going to move up into the right really linearly. I think the things that really matter to me are, I think everyone needs a toolkit to deal with fear and anxiety. You have to develop them. So I'm going to go really specific into my toolkit. I start my day. I have this notion of kind of winning the morning. And what I really mean is I'm going to win over fear and anxiety because I'm going to wake up with it in the morning. So the first thing I do is I get up at 5 in the morning. I have some sort of programmed workout. So that A gets me going, builds confidence because I just got out of bed early, probably earlier than most people. And then moving and exercising helps dial down at least how I'm impacted by anxiety. That's one. Second thing is I move out of that workout into a 2 minute and 30-second 41-degree cold plunge. So I actually torture my body,
Mhm.
which also relieves it of anxiety and has therapeutic benefit too. And then I do an 11-minute meditation. Years ago during the pandemic, somebody introduced me to a meditation coach that allowed me to just clear my mind, which I just frankly didn't know I could do. So those three things are how I start my day. And then that's just table stakes. That's a toolkit. And then you've got to have a really well-developed support system. So, that's either friends, colleagues. You have to invest and cultivate that. Somebody that you can go to and say, when the chips are down, because they will be, you'll have an ability to talk to that person, maybe get some advice, but just the act of talking is going to relieve fear. Um, and then there's the last thing I'll tell you, and I practice all these things, are you need to go do things that bring you positive energy. Everyone needs to develop these. And like my friends make fun of me because like I develop like lots of different random hobbies because generally like I find they're portable. Like you're in a different city and you enjoy going to movies, you can go see a movie there, and that 2 hours is going to rest your mind. So think about what I'm saying, a really determined toolkit to relieve fear and anxiety. These are things you can do. They are under your control. I call them micro wins. You're going to go into that day having already accomplished a bunch of things and relieved yourself of anxiety. It's a support system, which are people. And then there are activities that you can go do and they will bring you positive energy.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think, the entrepreneurial journey, positive energy is so critical because
It
especially if
is.
you're the person leading it, it sometimes feels like all the bad things are coming up to you. And so you need to be able to offset that to stay in a good place. And I love the example you gave of a very prescriptive, instead of trying to say, I'm just not going to have any fear. Here's just what I'm going to do to address mine. So kind
That's
of
right.
leaning into that a bit. So
Mhm.
you're out of private equity fund and you're working there and you make this decision to go start your own. And
Yeah.
what I find so fascinating about that is like when you think about people, like I've interviewed tons of people who worked at like Google and these big companies, and they'll tell me like, hey, I helped lead, this new business that grew to $20 billion. And for me, the question was always like, well, how much of that was you? And how much of that,
Yeah.
the rocket ship that you were on? When you are thinking about leaving your private equity firm to start your own, right? I'm sure you wrestled with that a little bit of like how much of
Oh, yeah.
our investing
Oh, yeah.
process was my intuition versus the brand, the infrastructure. So what, just walk us through that journey, that
Yeah.
thought process.
So like you got to be a little naive and a little slightly narcissistic to go do what I'm going to talk about. I sort of think every entrepreneur. So
Yeah.
fast forward, leave the university, left banking, went to private equity, went to business school, came out to LA, and now I'm a partner in a private equity firm, somebody else's firm. That's where I'm at this point. This is 2012. I've been there for 7 years. Um, I was still in love with the work, but constantly decided for myself, man, I'm not in love with anything else in this experience. My partners don't seem nearly as energetic as I am, and all I do is piss them off by being more productive. I don't ever remember my dad telling me one of my partners may one day shoot me in the back. And it was that kind of environment, as a lot of firms can be,
Yeah.
because the problem with private equity, it's zero sum.
Yeah.
People at the end of their careers are sometimes productive, but they hold a lot of economics, and the only way young people can come is to be productive and take economics from them. That's a tough thing to reconcile. I was at that moment. Um, I was constantly being told you don't have to kind of go in a really narrow lane. Don't go get all involved with the company. Stay at an altitude. You're not capable of that. You've never run a business. There's just a lot of you're not capable of. And so, man, I'll be honest with you. I thought in my mind, all of my success were from decisions I made, relationships that I cultivated. That was what I was saying to myself. Therefore, I could do it outside of there, and there was no value to this brand or infrastructure. Canada, I didn't even think about that. And you tell me enough times I can't do something, now I want to go do it.
Yeah.
And I honestly was a bit impulsive. I didn't spend 6 months developing my business plan. Candidly, I got pushed to the brink on a sort of just a moment of a couple of weeks of anxiety and tension within my firm's walls. I went on a ski trip. I wrote a business plan on a napkin and said, I'm going to go raise some money. I'm going to buy these kinds of businesses. And I'm going to leave my job on Monday. I went and told my wife I'm going to do it, and I did it.
Yeah.
And now one thing I got right was my partners at that time were raising a fund. So they took really good care of me on the way out. And in deference to me not going and raising my own fund while they were in the market, I got about a year to sort of do what I needed to do, get myself sort of really build out my business plan. I mean, they sort of did that for me, but it was also helpful to their process. But I did not spend, I didn't whiteboard the whole thing. It was, I'm going to go jump, and I've been successful because of me, not because of them. And that's obviously not totally fair, but that was my mindset at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that's a theme, right? Of don't overly plan everything. Just
Yeah.
you've acquired the skills, have faith that those skills are going to translate. So you leave, you've got that year. At any point in time during that first year where you're getting rejected, I'm sure,
Oh,
left and right.
oh.
What where you're like, oh shit, what did I do?
Let me give you a great oh shit moment. There's two of them. First, I had to go acquire a website and create this hokey name called Varsity Healthcare Partners. I didn't have an office, so I worked out of my house for the first time ever. My wife and I are home during the day, and she is like, I don't like this. Like you need to go work at Starbucks. I mean, you got to go through all this shit.
Yeah.
I hang a shingle, meaning I tell people we're in business and we have a website. And I mean, people I've been in business for 10 years with, just because I changed my business card, no call back. I'm going to give you one other data point. I started saying, okay, I've got my plan. I know what I want to invest in. Now I've got to go find some investors. I thought, you know what? I'm 38 years old with a small track record, not a long one, but a good one, but not a long one. I realized like I'm probably not somebody that the institutional world, meaning pensions, endowments, professional investors that fund private equity funds. So I'm going to go the family office route. Maybe they'll be able to take a risk on me, and inevitably one did. But in the beginning, Sandeep, I went and bought a database access of all the family offices in the country, and I spent literally 2 weeks copy and pasting. Here's who I am. Here's what we want to do. Here's what Varsity Healthcare is. We sent out, I think it was like 1,400 emails. This is fascinating.
Mhm.
How many people called us back? Not one. Not one.
Yeah.
Now, amazing. But what happens in this story is we find the one unicorn who happened to be a gentleman named Stuart Miller, who at the time was is still the CEO of Lennar, the global home building business. The Miller School of Medicine is the University of Miami Medical School. I tell you that because Stuart Miller is intellectually interested and passionate about U.S. domestic healthcare. And we got him at a time where he was really interested in backing some people early in their career at attractive terms, albeit, and was sort of a little bit sort of ambivalent about funding big private equity firms who he thought was just buying businesses from themselves, not doing anything terribly unique. Why am I paying them all this money? I got to find a couple of guys, and along came myself and my co-founder. And that's how we launched Varsity. He put us in business.
Did you guys have a relationship with that pre-existed
No,
or?
We cold called. That was
Okay.
one, like that
Yeah.
was a later cold call.
Yeah.
It turned out we had some good personal references that could speak for us, but
Yeah.
no. His family office called East Rock Capital are the founding money behind what is now Varsity Healthcare Partners. In the early days, that was our only money.
Got it. So you've got the first dollars in. Now you got to go find a deal. And
Now we're
I'm
in business.
sure you're competing with everyone else and
Oh
you're
yeah.
known. Walk us through kind of that experience, like what it took to get that first one done. And then after that, when did you feel like, all right, we've got something here?
Yeah, so I mean, never did I feel like I had something for years. I was just constantly like, but the beauty of it is I had all my chips were on the table. All my attention was on investing, not running a firm. It was my partner and I and an associate that we had dragged back into private equity. He had previously left. We got him to come work for us and told him we can't pay you for a while. It was that kind of ragtag operation. We This answer is going to surprise you. We competed with all traditional regular way private equity. It's all about how you sell yourself. We would
Mhm.
say, hey, we've got a several billion-dollar family behind us. Feel free to call them if you need to validate that our capital source exists. No one ever did. Again, if you act like you belong
Sure,
and
sure.
speak confidently, uh, and we were obviously in a pool of deals where we were qualified to be playing lower middle market healthcare services. And we had come from that world, so people sort of knew who we were. All of that allowed us access, but we had to go earn it. We had to go knock on doors. But the real thing that we got, so we were doing all that, and then in the off hours we had three ideas that we wanted to pursue. One was dermatology, specifically skin cancer. One was eye care, specifically the chronic eye intervention, which is ophthalmology and optometry. And then primary care in the deep south, meaning taking care of folks in capacity starved markets and getting to them before acute conditions become really expensive and chronic and multiple morbidities develop. Those were our three ideas. And so we went and did what we were trained to do. We started cold calling. We developed our dermatology thesis, and this is where things really get moving. Every good entrepreneurial journey starts with one big exit. So, can I shamelessly just talk about that exit right now?
Sure. No,
Okay, because it was our first deal.
yeah.
Um,
That
we
was
had
your
an
first deal.
idea.
Your
It was
first
our
deal.
first deal.
Yeah, amazing.
So our idea was in this country, and we were right about this. There were two generations of Americans who never wore sunscreen. There was only 16,000 dermatologists, net declining to treat that epidemic. The reasons for that are that we artificially limit residencies in this country.
Yeah.
Um, hey, there's nobody really doing this at scale. Couldn't we do this and make life easier for doctors by building a mothership that can provide the business processes for their back office, for billing, for compliance, for marketing? Um, Seemed like a real opportunity. So we started cold calling practices, literally purchased lists of practices from insurers. We took a shit ton of Southwest Airlines flights to visit dermatologists. We called on 100. We signed. I looked at this the other day. We signed NDAs with 36. So I actually did diligence on 36 different dermatology practices, all different code mixes, reimbursement climates, staffing models, marketing strategies, different levels of ancillary revenue, different levels of profitability. I would tell you at the moment that we did what comes next, my co-founder and I knew more about the business of medical dermatology, maybe than anybody in the country in 2014. And we find our way to our first acquisition, which is a really sexy name called Dermatology Associates of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. That becomes our platform. We
Yeah.
go recruit a bunch of guys to run what became what we called Forefront Dermatology. And 19 months later, we had done 24 acquisitions. We had opened another 9 clinics. We had tripled the size of the business, and a Canadian pension fund came out of nowhere and bought Forefront Dermatology for just under $500 million. 19 months into our first investment as entrepreneurs, 19 months into our first time doing anything on our own.
Wow.
Our wives finally were like, "Oh my God, you're not going to go bankrupt." Um, but I'll be honest with you, like I celebrated like a little bit, and then I was on to the next deal.
Excellent. Right. Right. Well, I think that's what makes you who you are, right?
You're right.
It's keep on going.
I was
So
like, we got to keep going. We got to keep, we got some momentum now. Let's take this case study and go, and we did go make our eye care business happen and primary care, and the rest just sort of rolls out from there. That was the early innings of varsity healthcare.
so let's shift a little bit to talking more about, advice that you can give or feedback you can give to the students that are listening here is like, what's what's one piece of conventional advice that you think is actually wrong or heavily overrated, right? Because there's so much input, but what's one thing that you
Yeah.
look back on, you're like, man, that was totally wrong.
Oh man. Okay. So I'm going to start with, I believe work-life balance is important. I think it's
Mm,
critical. To function as a leader, you simply have to take your head out of that climate, put it in another climate, get energy from a lot of different people. Plus, you probably have personal pursuits like being a father and being a husband. All of those things need to get done. Any leader, I believe, needs to be doing those things. I don't believe work-life balance is possible nor appropriate. Go back to my in the early innings of
yeah,
someone's career where they're really serious about being successful, defined however they define it. I simply don't believe that. It wasn't available to me, so of course, but I also think it is that hard to be good at what you do. It is
yeah,
all consuming. Nobody, at least I'm not talented enough not to go all in. Not because I don't like having fun or being with my family or I love my wife. I love all those things. But the price of success for me required, I'm just, again, more talented people may not have to do this. I had to, it was switches, not dials. Like
yeah.
I only had switches.
I love that. I love that. So when you rewind back to your college experience, was there something you felt like, man, I wish I did more of this or
Yeah.
less of this?
So of course now I'm going to say I wish I wasn't as worried about what was going to happen day zero after year four ended.
Right.
I wish I could have just said someone should have said to me, "You are a graduate of the University of Michigan. You have a part-time job, which means you have work ethic, you have good grades, you seem like a good person. There are career paths, there are graduate schools for you. You don't need to be so anxious about
Yeah.
what's going to happen. Absorb, like go to, like I skipped the Ohio State game my senior year, which was the game before the Rose Bowl where we shared, I would argue we won, but we did
Yeah.
technically share the
Right.
national championship that year. Like I should have done that. I should have gone out more. I should have been less worried about my future, but I didn't have it in me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I wholeheartedly relate to that. That fear of the unknown is both, I think, very healthy, but also can be paralyzing in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so for many of the students who are part of this are in the School of Engineering, graduate school. They're not in the business school. For someone trying to, and today, so but very different times than when you first broke into finance. What feedback would you give them on how to think about breaking into a career in finance, private equity, um, to help
Yeah.
differentiate themselves?
So I actually think it's possible, and candidly, this playbook really works. And I fundamentally believe in life, and you're going to hear it consistent with what we talked about earlier in this call. There is a high correlation between people that know what they want to do and are successful. So if you know you want to do
Yeah,
private equity, and this goes for any industry, the first thing you do is start by talking to people in that industry. So my second year of business school, I would spend I called up every single person that worked at a private equity firm in that Facebook, went to lunch with them, and each time asked them to introduce me to three more people in
yeah,
private equity. So, I mean, I had the body of knowledge, and in that journey, you also ask them. I happen to come from the industry, but if you all are doing that, think about what skills you need to be successful in just interviewing and then doing your job well. And so go acquire those skills. It's actually not that hard. You can
yeah,
take an economics class, an accounting class, an introductory finance at the University of Michigan and I believe still access the same interviews as the guys at the undergraduate business school. You're going to have to make a strong case. But the case I would hire folks all the time, still will today. Somebody who did really well outside of their in their concentration, and then went the extra mile to educate themselves via economics, accounting,
Yeah.
finance, did all the ground game to understand private equity. That's the way you kind of enter this industry. You can get yourself in the role. Once you're in an interview, all things are equal. I think
Yeah.
like all that resume, all the yeah, you went to Ross, good for you. Like we're in the same interview now.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. When you think about developing an edge, right? Because that's what you're trying to do ultimately. It's like, how do you
Totally.
differentiate yourself? Um, there's so many more avenues to do that today than I think there was in the past. Um, when you're interviewing people today, younger people coming out of college, coming out of grad school, are there things that you notice about them? Are there things that
Yes.
the people that stand out are doing beyond like motivation and those qualitative factors?
So those are still big markers, though. I mean, like markers of success to me at a young age. I happen to believe what I just said. Somebody who may not be in may not be at the business school, but went and did really well and immersed themselves in that curriculum. That's a motivated person. So I look for signs of self-motivation. Academic record is one, but only one. I
Yeah.
generally look for somebody who has demonstrated excellence somewhere else. So like oftentimes maybe they played an instrument or they played a sport competitively. They led a philanthropic organization. Again, that's just self-motivation. And to me, like that is the coin of the realm. Like
Yeah.
I just like somebody who is so determined to be successful generally is, I think, if they can
Even if it's
marry it with,
even if it's unrelated
yeah,
entirely.
I think they'll be successful. It's just you don't realize how deep a minority of the people in the economy that is.
Yeah.
Because people value different. I just made a relatively provocative remark about work-life balance. So I'm self-selecting into people who are that motivated,
Yeah.
who are that enthusiastic about what they're doing. I will tell you something. The name of my firm is Varsity Healthcare. Um, it's an incredibly silly name, but sports, having played on a team, a
Mhm.
lot of the values that we espouse candidly came from being able to play on those teams. I wasn't even very good at basketball, but I made
Yeah.
that team my senior year. I got a lot out of that. We tend to hire people that
Sure.
come from that just played a sport.
Yeah.
We're part of a team.
Yeah. I mean, when I was at the university a couple of months back, one of the things I noticed, and that when I talked to students, especially the undergraduate students, they were getting a lot of their advice from juniors and seniors in school. And I kept on pushing them saying, hey, look, those are not the people to be talking to.
No,
Exactly what you're saying, which is reach out to people who've actually done it, right? Who are in that field, because they're going to give you the cheat sheet to how to break in from the ground level, right? Not sort
100%.
of check the box. Here's what you need to do. Here's the interview questions, and it's
And
surprising how
Sandeep,
few
can I
people do that.
I was about to say, and you just said it's surprising how like infrequent this is. I generally think people really enjoy talking about themselves and their lives. They're just rarely asked. You go find take a fairly cast a wide net. I think you're going to find your yields way higher than you think of people that are
Yeah.
going to actually return that email and say, "I'd love to talk to you about in my industry and private equity and whatever it is." So I totally agree.
I think the key to that is it's got to be sincere curiosity,
Yeah,
not
not
I'm,
networking.
I'm hitting you up for a job, right? Because I think people can
Yeah.
sneak that out in about 2 seconds. And as long as you do that, the rewards for that are tremendous. So we've only got a few minutes, Dave. So let's kind of wrap up with maybe like a lightning round of questions here. So when you were at school, like what was your favorite memory at Michigan?
So beating Ohio State to win a share of the Big Ten championship and watching all the students invade the dean's house that
Yeah.
day. I mean, I'll never forget it. There were people in the stands, sorry, people in trees, literally
Yeah.
climbing up in the trees on East University and South University. I mean, it was awesome.
What's one book that you've read that's had the most impact on you?
Oh man. Um, okay, so I'm like this is a lightning round, so I'm going to do what comes to my mind. There's a book called The Warrior Elite that changed my life, which is just a narrative about the guys who go try out for Navy SEAL training and why they would consider a career like that. It's a really good narrative on um, kind of what we're talking about, personal motivation, in this case, to become a warrior. Um, I'll give you a second one just because it's top of my mind and we do some work with him. Um, One of the best there's two great business books that I think really changed me. One is Moneyball, which is not about business, is about baseball analytics, but that way of thinking. And then there's a book called Team of Teams, which was written by Stan McChrystal, who is the general that ran Afghanistan for the US. And it's about, you know, how to create an organization that innovates. It's talking about the military, but it's actually an allegory for running a
Yeah.
small business that is not top down. And I think it's brilliant.
The nicest thing someone has ever done for you. I'm stealing this from another podcast, but I love this question. And
Oh man. Well, my grandmother paid for my high school. I went to a private high school that I was a kid that was in trouble. So I got in trouble a bunch of times. My grandmother paid for my high school and helped pay for college, which I'll never forget. Um, I think that's my answer, man. God, I should have a lot more behind that, but that was really nice.
I mean, that's pretty nice. All right. So last question here is if, you know, if someone's listening to this and they forgot everything else you said, what's the one thing you hope they will take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I really want to go back to that philosophy of like, what are you good at and what do you like? Like those two questions should be bulletproof in your choice of career. Um, like I looking for enthusiasm in yourself, I just think is something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. So when you see it, so I'm going to give you one example, hard example to leave this group with. When I was at Harvard Business School and you're in this big room, um, you know, every day you're doing case studies. And one day a classmate of mine turned to me and said, "Hey man, like, I know you said you would consider like a different career, but I watch you jump out of your seat every time there's a case study on some merger or acquisition. And like, I just would ask you to like pay attention because you really like this stuff."
Yeah.
So there's an example.
It looks like we got a question. Well, why don't you go ahead? Yep. All right. I don't think this is working. All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much for this.
My pleasure. Thank
Yeah,
you
I think
guys.
your story of, your story is incredibly relatable to students. And I've personally just been inspired, even from learning more in this conversation about your journey. So thank you so much for doing this. And I know you're a big supporter of the university and everyone here appreciates it.
Well, thanks for having me and go blue.
Thank you. Go Blue.